Good evening. Maybe we'll let the last few folks filter in and have a seat. Does the sound okay in the back? Great. Good evening, and welcome to this very special evening that we shall spend together. For 25 years, the Ellsworth Trust has sponsored the annual Ellsworth Lecture, JSC student scholarships, travel, and much more, all as testimony to the enduring legacy of Professor Bob Ellsworth. We thank the board and its enthusiastic members, several of whom are in attendance this evening, very, very much for making this evening and so much else possible at Johnson State. My pleasant duty this evening, my name is Dan Regan, for those of you who are visiting us from the community. I'm the academic dean at the college, and it's now my pleasant duty to turn to Professor Kit Cook, who will introduce tonight's speaker. But let me say that Kit is a beloved former JSC professor who stands for substance, for deep passion, not for show, but because it matters, and for her deep caring concern for JSC students. To use a March Madness metaphor, she's the point guard on my JSC starting five of great teachers. Kit, it's really a pleasure to welcome you back to campus.
Well, thank you. I'm not tall enough to be a point guard. It truly is a delight to be here this evening and to introduce tonight's speaker, Madame Liselotte Ivry, a Holocaust survivor who's come down from Montreal and the Montreal Holocaust Memorial Center to spend time with many students today, taking us back to those years, those searing and tragic years when 6 million plus victims of Nazi persecution perished. And they were years which in so many ways have defined much of the world since then. For the Holocaust certainly has shaped many questions we now ask. The obvious, how could this be allowed to happen? Couldn't anyone have stopped the path of events from the advent of Hitler and the Nazis in 1933 to the clearly discriminatory laws, the Nuremberg laws that were passed in Germany in 1935, which deprived all Jews of citizenship rights in the Reich, to the far more dangerous and ominous roundups and deportations of Jews and other targeted groups as the Nazis furthered their conquest of Europe. Wasn't there, in fact, an overwhelming failure of the world's leaders to respond to the Nazi regime of 1933 to 1945? And if so, how do we explain such indifference? And how do we live with that legacy today? Is it true, as Albert Einstein once reflected, that, quote, "The world is too dangerous to live in, not because of the people who do evil, but because of the people who sit and let it happen"? Oftentimes, but not always, I am persuaded he was right. But listen, because history did happen a certain way, doesn't mean it must always happen that way. Which is why I think I'm a historian. I think it's why Madame Ivry is here with us this evening. It's certainly why I teach. And we do this to listen, to learn, and to act. And in my own studying and teaching about the Holocaust over the years, I've become increasingly aware of two different things, rather paradoxical and going on at the same time. Number one, I am very much aware of how right now in 2008, 2009, the events of the Holocaust have a continuing impact right here at Johnson State, in our little idyllic place in the hills. And I'm also increasingly aware, as I get older, how much further away from those events and from the immediacy of testimony we are drawing. So just this, as an example, just this past fall, in my Holocaust class of EDP students, of only 8 students, I had 2 granddaughters of survivors and 2 other students with relatives, a grandfather and a great uncle, who had been among the U.S. Army troops liberating camps in the spring of 1945, not far from where the British were making their way to where Madame Ivry, then Liselotte Ivry, was waiting at Bergen-Belsen. So the questions, the discussions in that class, which, by the way, also included a young man who had fled Bosnia just 5 years ago from the war that has its continuing aspects of genocide, and had another older woman whose family had fled Cuba in 1959. So the discussions in that class were ones that reflected the continuing questions raised by the Holocaust and such events. Questions, obviously, about endurance, about suffering, about knowledge and awareness, about indifference and inaction, and ultimately, those perennial questions about personal choice and moral responsibility. And so, as time has now brought us into the 21st century, nearly 65 years since the end of World War II, it's really ever more important that we continue to study and to learn. Now, I'm an academic, and you're not here this evening to hear me speak too much about some of the questions I've been examining. But one of them has been in the area of looking very closely at only recently declassified documents which allow us into the world of communications intelligence and who knew what, when, about the intentions of the Nazis and the killing process. It's an area of study both intriguing and gut-wrenching and important. I think that the scholarly research must be done and needs to be done. It allows us to understand better intentions, obstacles to awareness, pitfalls in policy making, in analysis. And it allows us to explore such questions about, my goodness, weren't there opportunities to stop the killing? Couldn't the Allies have bombed Auschwitz? But the official documents, the published memoirs, the academic studies, all significant and revelatory, can only teach us so much, to hear, to learn from those who were there, who often at great cost and with great courage and stamina can take us back to those years and give us testimony, is to make the historical record all the more complete and truthful. Madame Liselotte Ivry, a true witness to history, will do just that for us this evening. Born Liselotte Epstein in 1925 in the Sudetenland area of Czechoslovakia, her family was thus in one of the first areas Hitler and the Nazis aspired to unite with the German Reich, which they did in 1938, 1 year before the outbreak of World War II. In 1942, as the Nazis further defined and intensified their racial policies of eliminating Jews and other so-called enemies, she and her family, her mother and younger brother, were deported to Terezín, also in Czechoslovakia, renamed by the Nazis Theresienstadt, which became the principal ghetto for Czech Jews. And thus the young Liselotte and her family began their perilous journey, a journey which I will let her detail for us this evening, but one which included Auschwitz, 3 other concentration camps outside of Hamburg, Bergen-Belsen, finally, where she was liberated in April 1945, at age 19, the sole survivor of her family. We may know the names: Theresienstadt, Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, but Liselotte Ivry will take us there, will give us the testimony in her own words, as she herself has said, actually of her very energetic work in her life in Canada. She believes, quote, "We are all put on this earth for a certain purpose, and I was chosen to speak for the 6 million whose voices were stilled. As a woman who's dedicated much of her life to carrying out this mission and being a true witness to history, she is giving us a great and truly most precious gift. It is our job to listen, and listen well. We are being given an extraordinary opportunity. Will you please join me in welcoming Madame Liselotte Ivry.
Happy to be here with you tonight. And I want to thank Professor Cook for introducing me, and thanks Dan. It gives me a chance to talk to you all, to speak to you about what happens when there are a lot of bystanders. I want to talk to you about what happened to me. But what happened to me happened to thousands, millions of people in the same way or similar. As you heard, I was born in a little village called Lisztany in Czech, Liechtenstein in German, where I lived there with my mother and brother, who was younger than me. My father died when I was 3 1/2, but my mother was such a force in my life. She was an honest, hard-working person and only wanted the best for me, but she taught me a lot. And that's why I'm here today and I'm able to speak to you, because she taught me to be strong, honest, direct. Unfortunately, time didn't last so long for me in Liechtenstein or Lisztany. It was a wonderful little town, or village as we would call it. I went there to school with so many of my friends. It was a little school, 4 classrooms, grade 1, separate 2 and 3 together, 4 and 5, 6, 7, 8. My friend and I, we would go to the field and meadows, pick strawberries and blueberries and mushrooms. We had lots of fun. It was a lovely place. We had a store where you could buy almost anything. You wanted stockings, you got stockings. You wanted gasoline, you got gasoline. You wanted herring, you got herring. You wanted chocolates, yes. I was the best customer, I must tell you. And so my mother decided that I should go to high school, but we did not have a high school in our place. So she went to the city of Pilsen, which is 18 kilometers from Liszczany. And she went to the principal of a high school and said, I have a little girl who would like to come to school here. And he says, fine, just let her come and she will write an exam. And so I did. But I couldn't go back and forth to my village, so my mother had to find a place where I would be boarding. Can you imagine a 12-year-old girl boarding, being all on her own, being responsible for herself? It was a good schooling, and I turned out okay. It was 1937. Times were changing. Hitler was on the march. In the spring of 1938, he moved into Austria. After all, Austria was his homeland. He was born in Braunau, in a little town not far from the German border. But now he was the master, or he wanted to be the master of the universe, so he just walked in. But the Austrians weren't unhappy. They had a plebiscite, and they voted that he should come. That was March 1938. And so where I lived, my mother tongue was German, and this was called the Sudetenland. And even so, Hitler met Chamberlain, and they discussed the state of Europe, and he promised that he wouldn't attack anymore or go anywhere. But of course he did. And so in October of 1938, he started marching into Czechoslovakia. But my little village wasn't supposed to be overrun, and so we were quite content to stay. But during the night on the 8th of October, I knocked on our door. My mother got excited, and she went to see who it was. It was a Czech officer, and he said, could I buy some gasoline? And my mother said, gasoline for what? He said, we are leaving because the Germans are marching in. And so she asked him, would you take us along? And he says, yes. He sent a truck, and we put some things from our store on the truck. And then she said, would you take my little girl along? And he said yes. So my mother told them that they should bring me another little village not too far away, which wouldn't be occupied. And she arrived with my brother in the afternoon, upset and crying and just terrible. She came from a family of 10 children, 5 boys and 5 girls, and most of them lived in Prague. So she got in touch with them, and they, of course, said, you have to come to Prague. So we took the train, and we came to Prague, and the relatives were waiting for us, and they divided us. I was supposed to stay with an uncle and aunt, my mother with a widowed sister and a bachelor brother, and my brother with a cousin. So I went there, and my aunt was a former school teacher, so it was most in her mind that I should go back to school, which I really wanted to because I loved going to school. So she took me to the high school in the neighborhood and asked the principal whether I could be a pupil in that high school. And he said, by all means, let her come tomorrow. Well, it was easy for him to say so because I couldn't speak Czech, and that was a Czech school. But you know, when you are 13 years old, you learn a language, 1, 2, 3, you can learn any language. It wasn't that difficult for me. I did very well in school. everything was just fine. I enjoyed being there. Till one fine day in spring. It was the 15th of March, 1939. I left school to go home for lunch. And I came to the main street. And to my horror, I saw German tanks and soldiers marching in. People were standing on sidewalks, watching this. Some were crying, some were howling. From that day on, my life changed forever. There were always new things you weren't allowed to do or give up. First thing was, we had to give up our radios. Then, we had to give up our jewelry. My mother gave me once a little ring for my birthday, and I really didn't want to part with it. But my aunt said, no, you cannot keep it. You don't want to go to jail right now, so you better give it. They took away the fur coats, they took away the art, they took away musical instruments. You know, after the war, they found in a warehouse about 900 pianos. We were not allowed to go on the sidewalk. We were not allowed to go in the park. We were not allowed to go to a theater, nor a cinema, nor could we go shopping when we wanted. In hindsight, these things really weren't that important. The things we gave up didn't have a soul. It is just like this desk hasn't got a soul. So as I say, in hindsight, it wasn't so terrible. Many more other things would come, which would be much more terrible. You know, Hitler had in mind that he's going to be the emperor of the world, and number one on his mind was to get rid of all the Jews of Europe. So he appointed a man by the name of Eichmann. That was his problem, to get rid of the Jews. So Eichmann arrived in Prague at the Jewish elders of the Jews and told them that any Jew who could get a visa from a foreign country like United States, Canada, Britain, Australia, or any of these countries, they would let us go. They would give us visas to leave. But unfortunately, nobody wanted us, or if very few. There were two little countries who took Jews. It was Cuba and the Dominican Republic. If you wanted to go to South America, you had to become Catholic. Well, some people were lucky. They went to some priest, and the priest would write a birth certificate. You know, he would falsify it. So he was very kind. And with that piece of paper, they were able to emigrate. I was supposed to go to Canada in 1938. At least that's what my mother planned to do with me, because I had an uncle living in Montreal. And so she wrote to him that he could get a visa for me, because she felt that at least one of us would be out and perhaps I would survive. She always had plans for me to be separate from him, her and my brother. Perhaps that would help. But unfortunately, there was this bureaucrat sitting in Ottawa, and he said, none is too many. And so hardly anybody got into Canada. Canada, such a large country, at that time they only had about 8 million people. What would it have been if they would have let in 50,000 people, saving them from certain deaths? The United States could have waived the quota system and let in, again, maybe 10 or 20,000 people, but it never happened. So since he couldn't get rid of us, he had to look around for some other place to put us. And so he went not too far from Prague to a town called, in Czech, Terezín, in German, Theresienstadt. It was called Theresienstadt after the mother of Emperor Joseph II. He honored her with the name of this town. It was an armory town, so that was perfect to put people there. He went to inspect it, and he found that it was just the right place to start. But he couldn't wait. So in October 1941, transport started to leave 1,000 people at a time to Poland, to Lodz. There already was a ghetto. And then he sends 340 young men to Terezin to prepare the camp, to fix up the kitchens, maybe some bunks and so on, so it would be ready for us to get there. And then the transport started. Every week, 1,000 people. You never knew when they will call you up, but you waited. So people started arriving in Terezin, but not only from Bohemia, Moravia, but from Austria, from Germany, from Holland, from Denmark, some from Greece, and later on even some from Hungary. You know, the transport started like with A, then it was AA, and so on. When my turn came and I left in the first week of September 1942, my transport was called BF, and my transport number was 992. My mother and brother came there already in August, and their number was AA, their transport was AAW. We all worked in Terezin. Everybody did something. Even children, if they could, they would work in little factories. Like my brother was working, he was 15 at the time. He was making wooden toys. My mother was a nurse. I became a nurse's aide. Like I used to come in the morning and I would wash the patients, and when I arrived there, they would say, "Oh, sunshine is coming," because I always had a smile on my face. Terezin was a very special place. It was like the Tower of Babel. You heard so many languages. We as young people, we could manage very well. When you're young, you're more lively, you have more hope in your system. But the older people, they just couldn't take it because there were so many in one room. And let's say in the morning they wanted to go to the washroom, there were lineups. There was no privacy. And many older people died very soon after they arrived there. But it was an unbelievable place. There were people who wanted to make music. There was this young fellow by the name of now I can think of the name. Schechter, his name was, Raphael Schechter. And he organized an orchestra. And so we had a symphony orchestra. But he wasn't satisfied. He also said, you know what? We have so many wonderful artists here, sopranos, tenors, baritones, conductors, composers. We can do it. So he put on the opera, The Bartered Bride. The Bartered Bride is a very famous Czech opera by Smetana, and it's a lively thing. And then he put on Fidelio. And in the end, he put on Verdi's Requiem, which is very unusual for a Jewish man to put on Verdi's Requiem. But he thought it was important that he would do that. But he had problems. He would train the soprano and the tenor, and they would know their parts, but they were called away, they were sent away, so he had to start all over again. Just recently, I came across a book called Music in Terezin. I didn't know that after I left in December of 43, that there were 3 more orchestras. So that meant there were 4 symphony orchestras, there were 4 chamber orchestras, there was an opera company, there were many people who wrote poetry, and we would be going into the lofts in these armories, and we had young people reading their poems, and it was just wonderful. To have a book, it was like having $1 million. We just wanted to read, we just wanted to escape, we just wanted to be not faced with what was going on. It was difficult. but we made the best of it. We tried to be happy. When you're young, you have boyfriends and girlfriends, and we tried to look nice. I bartered for a man's suit with, I don't know whether I gave a spoon of sugar and a spoon of cream of wheat, and we bartered. So I got this suit, and this woman who was working in a factory, in a place where there was a sewing machine, she could fashion this suit for me. She turned it inside out, she made a beautiful jacket, and from the pants she made a skirt. I went with that suit. I left Teresina. That was my suit I left in. We didn't have much to eat. We would line up always. And that's why I don't like to line up. There's certain things I don't like to do, which I had to do there. We got in the morning brown water. We got maybe one dumpling for lunch. We got soup, mostly turnip soup. And that's why I can't eat turnips anymore. For supper, we had a little piece of bread. And that was it. But this wasn't the most important thing, really. It was our future. Where will we go? What are they going to do with us? You know that they invited the Red Cross to come to Teresina, so they spruced it up. They had stores. They would sell merchandise in the stores. Where did this merchandise come from? It was the ones they confiscated from us. When we arrived, we had to go to a place where they looked into our suitcase. We had just a little suitcase, and what they thought it was not what we should have, they took it away. Well, you could all see in the store. They printed money. We had ghetto money. There was 100 crown, a 50 crown, a 20 crown, 1 crown, 50 hellers. They opened a coffee house. There was a jazz orchestra, just to fool people, to say how good the Jews have it. But they really didn't know how well we did, because transport started to leave all the time. You saw these lines of poor people walking with their little suitcase. Where were they going? I found out where they were going. First, my mother was called up, and my brother came during the night, and he said, you know, Mother was called up to go to the transport. I think I should go with her as a volunteer. And I said to him, well, if you think that's what you want to do, then you have to do that. And so he left with her in the middle of September 1943. Shortly after that, I was called up too. It was the 15th of December 43, not 42, 43. So they put us in the cattle cars as usual, always leaving late in the afternoon, so we would be traveling at night. And we arrived at the destination in the morning. The cattle car opened. There were a lot of yelling and screaming. The SS were there with their huge German shepherds and their guns. And little young boys of 16, 17, 18 in their striped pajamas were running around. And there were trucks standing there. And they would say, don't go on the trucks. Don't go on the trucks, because on the trucks you go to heaven. But you know, if there are people with dogs and guns, you have no choice. You have to go on the trucks. And they would say, do you know where you are? No. They said, you are in Auschwitz. But they said it in Polish, Oswiecimi. And you know, they might as well have said, you're in Kamchatka, because we didn't know what Auschwitz or Oswiecim was. And so we went on the trucks, and they took us to Birkenau, a satellite camp of Auschwitz. There were 5 camps. A transient camp, B, the family camp, C, a transient camp, D, only for men, and E, for the gypsies. So they drove us into the family camp, And after 2 weeks, we were allowed to go out, and then we found out that the people who came there in September, our relatives and friends, were there. So when they brought us there, they put us on a block. The block is a house. Women separate and men separate. And the women, the children mostly were with the women, and then they had their own block. On one of those blocks, we lived about approximately 600 or so women. We were not allowed to go out for 2 weeks. So we were there a little bit in that block, and then they said we have to go out and go to another block. And so we walked into that block, and we saw small tables with 2 chairs, one chair over here and one chair here. On one chair sat a young woman, and you had to sit down, roll up your sleeve. It was very hard for me because the seamstress made very tight sleeves on my suit, and so I had a very hard time getting it up. So I got my number right here on the forearm, whereas the others have the number over here. From that day on, I wasn't anymore Liselotte Epstein, but I became 70663. They marched us out again, and we marched toward the little forest. Of course, we had no idea what it was all about. You have to understand, it was December the 16th. In Poland, it gets pretty cold. And so we were marching, and they brought us into a building. No idea what this building was all about. We came there, we had to undress completely. They took all our clothes away, and naked we went into that room. The only thing we could keep were our stockings. There was a little bench there, we put the stockings on the bench. So we went there, showers were. They put some stuff on our hair in case we had lice. And then we got the water. Of course, at that time we didn't know what a miraculous thing that was, that there was water there, because they used the same room to gas people. You see, it was very simple. There was just a hole in the ceiling. And if they want to gas them, they didn't give water. They put a canister of cyanide, and they just dropped it. And the poison would spread. And the people who were in this room, they want to climb up. They wanted to get away from all that. And sometimes they found people on the floor still alive. So they shot them. Well, I was very fortunate. I had a shower. And then they took out to another room, and they started giving us clothes. If you were short, you got a long coat. If you were tall, you got a short coat. And they took away our shoes. We had these wooden clogs on. And then we would be marching out back to our block. And so I was on block 9. We didn't do any work. We would be standing outside in the morning to be counted. And the same thing in the afternoon, to be counted. And when we were lucky, it tallied, because the SS-man who counted us, he went then to the office and they were checking the numbers. And if it didn't work, the numbers didn't tally, we couldn't go in. They had to start all over again. So we sometimes spent most of the day being counted. We played a game with ourselves. We played pretend. We played that we're taking a wonderful warm bath. We pretended to open the valves and let the water go, and then you slowly would immerse yourself in the water. Pretend. We pretended to cook and bake, and said, oh, my mother did it like this. Oh, she said, my mother did it like that. And it was going back and forth. After all, we didn't have anything to work with, but we pretended. Winter continued, and we were at the beginning of March. And the oh yes, I forgot to tell you. I found my mother. She was in a terrible state already. I tried to help her. I tried to find a little more food. But when I brought it, she couldn't eat it anymore. And so she died on the 4th of January, 1944. And now we go forward to March of 44. You see, when we arrived, we had to sign a paper that we can be alive, or there will be special treatment after 6 months. Who knew what it would be? But we soon found out, because the transport, which arrived in September, was called out. You know, it was very simple. That all the numbers, they would come there in front of the block and would start calling out numbers, and the people came out, and when they had them all, close to 5,000, they marched them into A camp. And during the night, from the 8th to the 9th, it was a feast of Purim. And Purim, we celebrate victory over a horrible man by the name of Haman. And he was like Hitler. He wanted to kill the Jews. And somehow they always managed to do things they would coincide about with holidays and so on. And so during that night, they killed 4,970 Czech Jews. And one of them was my 16-year-old brother. So we knew what was waiting for us. We had another 3 months, right? It was a very difficult time for all of us. We were just walking around, trying to make the best of it. And we were angry at the world, because nobody came to help us. It was so simple. One lousy plane could have destroyed the tracks the railroad tracks going to Auschwitz. One bomb just to finish those crematoria, those gas chambers. But they couldn't spare one plane, because after all, we were Jews and nobody gave a damn. You know, here we are in 2009. We have Darfur going on. People are being raped and killed and starved, sitting in refugee camps. And who cares? Does anybody care? The Pope went to Africa. He went to Cameroon. There were 1 million people were waving and so on. It would have been a good time for the Pope to go to Darfur and see for himself what a tragedy that is. I have to remind you all, we cannot be bystanders, because we are causing terrible sorrow and we don't help anybody. So I beg of you, you can do things, because you don't know how powerful we are if we put our minds to it. We can do things. We can write to our senators and congressmen and say, hey, you know, that's important. People are dying every day. Mothers and children being raped. Do something. Don't let it happen what happened during the Second World War, that innocent people were killed. Now we know that we can do something if we want to. So we were walking around, hoping and never giving up. Because you see, without hope, there's no tomorrow. And we didn't give up. So you ladies and gentlemen and young people, never give up. Because without hope, there's no tomorrow. We didn't know that the invasion took place. We didn't know how badly it was going on the Eastern Front. Well, we had an idea because a lot of even SS men were sent to the front. But I also want to tell you that not everybody was bad, because there were some good people. And I want to tell you about a young man who was an SS man in Auschwitz. His name was Victor Pestek. He was a Romanian by birth, but a German national. What happened was, we would go out to collect stones so the man could build the road in the camp. Because, you know, in Poland there's a lot of clay and you fall in, so they thought they would have something to do. The girls would go out on the fields, bring the stone, and the boys would place the stones. So this one day, I went to gather the stones, and the SS man who was with me, his name was Victor Pestek, and there also was a prisoner along with me, and his name was Janek Lederer. He was the head of one of the blocks. And so we come to the field, and we were looking for the stones, but the two men were standing and they were pointing. And I thought that was really funny. What is he doing? Why does he show him things? Well, the next morning, I found out. The sirens went, and they only went when someone was missing. I said, I know who is missing. The Janek Lederer isn't here anymore. Well, Pestek provided him with a uniform, an SS uniform. He took him out, and they hopped on a train, and they came to Prague. Lederer had a mission. He wanted to tell people in Terezin what's going on in Poland. But you know what? Nobody believed him. Because how can rational people think that such a thing could happen? That they're being gassed and burned? How could anybody do a thing like that? So they didn't believe him. So he was a good man. I found out not too long ago why he did that. He was an SS soldier, and he was near Minsk in the Ukraine, and his fellow soldiers killed many, many Russians. And he was wounded, and he was found by a farmer in the barn the next morning. The farmer opened the door, and he was there with a comrade who was dead already. And the farmer didn't kill him. And so he went back, and he went to the hospital, and when he was well, he wasn't anymore a soldier, but they sent him to Auschwitz. And so he couldn't take that, and he wanted to do something about it, and he took a prisoner out of Auschwitz. He returned because he had a girlfriend. She was very beautiful. Her name was Renee Neumann. He loved her very much, so he wanted to help her, but they caught him, and they shot him. Renee Neumann survived with her mother, and she got married, and she lived in Australia. So one good man makes a big difference. As I said, the invasion took place, and the war wasn't going so well, so they needed some young people to go and work in Germany, cleaning up, building little houses and so on. So they decided that they want to take from our camp about 1,500 young women, about 1,000 young men, and ship them to Germany. How do they go about it? There has to be a selection. A selection is when you go naked in front of the SS man. In my case, it was Dr. Mengele. How do I know? Because he worked in my camp. He did experiments on dwarfs and twins. So he did selection, and he chose me to live. He only chose young women and young men. I'm a fatalist, and I tell you why. I suffer from psoriasis, and you know what it does? You have little bumps and scales all over your body. And just at that moment, I was clear as a bell, because if I would have had some scabs or some marks, I wouldn't be standing here. Fate wanted I should be standing here. And so we marched out, and we marched towards the women's camp, and they had an orchestra. You know, it was very strange. They were killing, but they liked music. So most of the camps had orchestras, and there was orchestra playing as we marched in. You know, there was a movie made about the conductor of that orchestra. It was called Playing for Time. And the person who portrayed the main character was Vanessa Redgrave. When I heard that, I was very upset, because Vanessa Redgrave wasn't very much a friend of the Jews. And so I phoned up the radio station, and I said, how could it be that Vanessa Redgrave would play this wonderful Jewish girl? But you know, the director was right to choose her. Because if he would have chosen a nice girl without controversy, very few people might have gone and seen the movie. But because there was a controversy about Vanessa Redgrave, many people went to see the movie. So you see, things happen as they should. And so we stayed there about 2 or 3 days. The inmates who were there, they really didn't like us, because we were the only inmates who had hair. All the others had shaven heads. Why they decided that we should have hair, I really don't know. And a few days later, we made our way to the train. Lo and behold, a lot of the guards were not SS, but soldiers, older soldiers who they couldn't use anymore on the front. And so we boarded the train. How miraculous to get out of Auschwitz. I mean, to think about it, you cannot comprehend. To leave all this behind and go somewhere else. How could that be? How could it happen to us? We were very grateful that we got out. So we started, the train started, and we would go a little bit. There was an air raid, and we had to stop, and then we went a little more, and there was another air raid. You know, it was the summer of '44, a lot of air raids going on. And so the next morning, we arrived in a big city. It was my birthday, the 7th of July, 1944. I arrived in Hamburg. Thrilled to be away, thrilled to be alive. And so we started our new life in Hamburg. We were put up in a warehouse, which was very clean. I just found out a few years ago it was at the back of a warehouse. On one side it was on the road, on the other side was the water. You know, you had the tide coming in and out. And the first night, we had only 2 beds, just 2 tiers. We got a pretty good soup. There was a place where we could get washed. It was clean. We were kind of content. But during the night, the whole thing started to shake and rattle. It was a huge air raid. Some people were scared. But you know what? We got used to the air raids because we had so many. During the night, it was the British, and during the day, it was the American, and they bombed whatever was standing there. We used to watch it at night. It was a shower of stars coming down. They would make, we call it Christmas trees, like in 4 points, and whatever was in there, in the morning it was gone. I worked in a factory cleaning up. We did all kinds of things. Mostly we worked with bricks. We were catching and throwing and catching and throwing. We did have a little more food, Like the soup was better. It was not always turnips. And in the end, there were no gas chambers. So no matter how the bombs were falling, we loved it, because the more they were falling, the sooner the war is going to be over, and that's what we prayed for. But we didn't stay there very long, because they liked to move us around. So they sent us to outside of Hamburg, a place called Neugraben, where I worked in a sand pit. But they gave me a job. We had a little train, and I was a switcher. So when we came to a crossing, I would jump out, switch over the tracks, and jump back in again. So that was pretty good. The man who was the engineer of my little train was a political prisoner. So he had to go to the police and say, hey, I'm still here, didn't run away. And he would sometimes bring me an apple or so. So that was pretty good too. We didn't stay there too long. They moved us again. They moved us to a place called Tiefstack, where I worked in a factory, and I made these big bricks with the holes in it. I had another prisoner would be next to me, and she would be mixing the cement with the stones, and then we would put it in that mold, and I had to bang it hard, because if you didn't, when you lifted it up, it would fall apart. So this is what I'd worked at, and it wasn't so bad. This was a new camp, so the little rooms were fine. We had only this bunk bed. You know, it was so much better than before. And we had friends, and you know, we get along well. Because you see, what the Germans really wanted, that we should become just like animals, like vermin. They wanted that we should steal from each other, fight each other, not getting washed, just became animals. But they didn't succeed, because we are not animals, we are human beings, and we wouldn't let that happen. So one day we finished our work, and we walked toward the gate to come into our camp. The sirens went. So we knew that the bombers were just over the channel. And we told our guard, who was a fine fellow, I must say. He was kind of a rotund soldier. He always wore a canister for his gas mask. He didn't have any gas mask in there. He had a few apples in there. And we called him Papi. And we would say, Papi, you know, there's going to be an air raid. Let's get in. He said, you know, I can't let you in because you have to be counted. And before he finished saying that, there was another siren that meant that the planes really are coming over the city. And the next moment, the bombs are starting to fall, and poor Papi got it. The girl next to me, she also got it. It wasn't a bomb, it's a shrapnel, you know, they splintered, and that was worse than anything else. And I started running and running till I came to the end of the camp. And they demolished our camp. It was the British on the way to Dresden. It was a time when Dresden was being bombed every day. And because we were near a power station, you see, radar didn't work so good yet, so they had the chimney, so they knew where to go. They flew always over us, hundreds and hundreds of planes, these fortresses. You could hear, woo. It was continuous like that. But our camp was gone, and quite a number of kids girls were killed. I found out later on from a flyer who was on that plane. I met him in Montreal, and he was telling me that they ran into problems and they had to let go. And they really were very upset what they had to do. And so the Germans had to move us again. They had to find a place for us. And so they brought us to the station. And so we were lying there on the grass waiting for the train. There was an air raid while we were there, but it really didn't faze us because I told you we were not afraid. And then the train arrived and we went in the train. And the next morning we arrived in a new place. They let us out. We started marching toward the camp. If somebody wants to describe hell, they had to come to that place. And that place was called Bergen-Belsen. I arrived in the first week of February 45. They didn't have any more bunks for us. We were lying on the floor. The toilets were no more. There was no water, hardly any food. We had to stick it out. There was no way out. Typhoid was raging because this type of typhoid is carried by lice, by body lice. And the people there were full of it. We tried to keep clean as much as possible, but it was very hard. I had a friend there. She was much older than me. I don't know how she got through the selection, but she was there. We called her Baba Marashova. She did the most horrendous work. She never said, I don't do it. She cleaned up, you know, the feces were all around because the toilets were, she did everything. And so she got a little more soup, because that's all we got. And if she had a little more, she would share it with me. Baba Morashova was a typhoid also. And the Germans ran away. They left because the war was coming closer. You could hear the guns quite clearly. And so they brought in Hungarian soldiers. And if you think they were any better, they were. They killed a lot of girls because we were trying to get some food. They had winter storage there of carrots and turnips and potatoes, so we tried to find some of that so we could eat something. And then they left. There was no one there. So I had 3 friends, and we thought, stupidly enough, that we have to prepare for the Red Cross. After all, nobody's here, so they will come and they will want to register. So we found a little table, and we started marching on the main road, coming to the entrance of the camp. And there were some people hidden, and they started shooting at us. My friend who was standing next to me, she got a bullet, but she had a pad in her blouse, and the bullet went into the pad. And before we knew it, a big tank arrived with a white star on it. Who knew what it meant? We didn't. But the turret opened, and there was this young man with curly black hair. I noticed that even then. And he said, a division of the Allies came to liberate you. The gates opened, and they drove in. Oh yes, the first thing they told us, that Roosevelt died. You see, Roosevelt died on the 12th of April, and this was the 15th of April. So they had to tell us the news. I cried, silly me. The man who could have saved me didn't care. And now, since he was dead, I was crying. Wasn't very smart of me. He was a good man. He did a lot for the world, for the United States, but he let us down. He was a bystander also. And so they drove in, and they saw this whole mess, the people lying there, sick and dying and dead. It was their first camp they ever entered. And they couldn't believe what they saw. So they got in touch with headquarters, and they said, please rush in nurses and doctors because this is horrific what we have here. And the first thing they did, they put up some showers because, you know, we didn't wash for a long time. And then next to Bergen-Belsen, there's a town called Bergen, and that was an armory. So they started bringing doctors and nurses, and they moved the sick people there. I somehow didn't get typhoid. So I was one of the very last ones to go out. And so they brought me to Bergen, and I started to work in the kitchen. Kitchen is always very good, right? There's food there. We would get barrels of butter from Denmark. We had half a cow then. We would cook soups and things like that. But then there was, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? And there was this friend of mine who I knew since 1940, and she found out that her husband found out that she was alive, and he was coming to get her. And I said, Eva, do you think I could go with you home? Home. No one there, but you go home. And so her husband arrived with a truck, and so a few of us were going on that truck. There was this friend of mine called Chinda, who went with me, and then there was a young woman, her name is Ruth Bondi, who became a very successful journalist and writer. And so we went from Bergen-Belsen through Germany to the Czech border. We got off the truck. We stood there and we sang the Czech national anthem. We went back on the truck, and at noon or shortly after noon we arrived in Prague. And the young man said, okay, girls, that's as far as we go. We traveled light, you know, not a penny in our pocket. I remember I had a leather jacket which I found in one of the warehouses, and then I got an American army jacket which was very nice. That was about it. And so there was a young woman, and she said, girls, what are you going to do? We said, we don't know. She said, you know what? I have my apartment back. I even found my husband. So, you know, you can stay a few days with us till you kind of find out what you want to do. And she gave me the address, and I knew exactly where she lived because I was familiar with Prague very well. I lived in many places. And so I said, fine, thank you very much. And so Chinda and I, we went on the streetcar. We had no money. So there was a soldier who paid for us. And so we got there. And then we had to find out how we are going to manage. We found out that in the nunnery, they would give us lunch. You met a lot of people from all over the place. We were all standing there waiting for that little bit of lunch. There was an office for returnees, and they would give us a little money. Oh yes, I forgot to tell you. When we were liberated by the British, they told us that whoever has someone they want to write a letter to, they can. I said, I have an uncle in Canada. I know his address. She said, good. I said, his address is 1448 Bishop Street. You see, we had to train our memories. And I have a very good memory. So when I started back to school, to university, it was cinchy for me because I trained my memory. I could remember many things. And so we also could go to a movie, only when we had an escort, a British soldier. I found myself one. No problem. So the first film I saw, it was 1945, May. It was Gilda, with Rita Hayworth and Glenn Ford. I couldn't take my eyes off her, this wonderful long hair, ready, beautiful. But I must tell you, we couldn't see very well the screen because we all smoked. The British supplied us with the best cigarettes you can imagine. Senior service. You know anybody who smoked senior service? They came in metal tins. They're great. Something very important I have to tell you. We were free to go anywhere we wanted. So we could go into the countryside, go and visit little villages around. But we were good people. We didn't go there to steal, nor to plunder, nor set those houses on fire, nor hit the people who lived there. We had good reason to do these things. After all, horrible things were done to us. But we would never do that. Never. I don't think that any of you ever heard that a person who went through this horror killed someone. I don't think they did. We wanted to be human again because they wanted to make vermin out of us, but they didn't succeed. We all started our new life, hard as it was. I went to see the mother of my friend from Terezin. I remembered her address well. When I came there, the superintendent told me they moved. He gave me the new address. While I went to the office where they would help us, I see they had photographs of people, and they said, "This is my brother. The last time I know he was in Buchenwald. This is my mother. She was in Sachsenhausen. This is my uncle. He was in Mauthausen. Do you know him?" And I found Hanush Gerstl, my friend. He was also being looked for. So when I found his parents, his father knew already that he died in Buchenwald in January 44, and his mother was still waiting. But they were very kind to me. First of all, I used to go there for meals. She was a wonderful cook. He went illegally in 1940 to Palestine. He joined the army and was fighting in North Africa with Attlee, Rommel. When that was finished, they moved up to England, and then they joined the army coming back through Europe. And he knew that his wonderful son is never going to come back. So they decided they would take me in. And he was a very practical man. He said, "You want to go to Canada, right?" I said, "Yes, I have an uncle there. He knows that I'm alive and that I want to come." He says, "First things first, you will go to school. You can live here and to study English." And that's what I did. And so I was very fortunate. When I came in 1949 to Canada, I was able to speak English, which very few people did who came from Europe at that point. And so I went there to school, but then I needed a job because I needed to make a little money, and I did find a job, and I was with the Jewish community. First I was, horrible place, I was sorting out clothes which came back from Terezin. But then my uncle, was my mother's cousin, came back from Palestine, and he was made chief rabbi of Prague. So could they have a relative of the chief rabbi doing that job? I don't think so. So I started working in a newspaper called Vestnik. This newspaper exists today. It's called Rosh Chodesh. I get it every month. And then somebody met me in the entrance, and he said, "Listen, you speak English?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I have a good job for you with American Joint." I said, "That's wonderful." So I went and I had an interview, and I got the job, and it paid in dollars, so of course it was much better, and I could go to a restaurant every Saturday and have a wonderful time. And this is how my new life began. And I was waiting for the visa from Canada. It arrived in the spring of '49. Oh yes, I also applied to go to Australia because I waited such a long time to go to Canada. Within 6 months, I got the visa to Australia, but I thought it was far too far, so I didn't go. I arrived in Canada at my uncle, and since I spoke English, I could find a job, and there I found my husband, and I got married very shortly after. I have 2 children, I have 5 grandchildren, I have 5 great-grandchildren. And I go anywhere anybody wants me to speak to young and old, to tell them what can happen when there are a lot of bystanders. And we have to be watchful what happens in the world. When I started speaking 23 years ago, and somebody would say, do you think that could happen again? I would say no. But if somebody asked me today, I say yes. So thank you very much for listening to me. And if you have any questions, please tell me so. Thank you. Okay.
I think we'll all agree from Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen to the stage at Dibden of Johnson State College is quite a journey. As Mrs. Ivry mentioned, I think she'd be glad to field your questions if you have any. I would only ask that if you're close enough, I think we have a live microphone over here. If you're close enough with your question to that microphone, just come down and use the microphone. And if not, and you could speak up loudly from where you are, I'll try to repeat your question as best as I can. So, anyone have anything you'd like to pose to our visitor? Anyone? Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your experiences. They're very, very indicting. During her introduction, Professor Cook posed the question, how could this be allowed to happen? I think there's a parallel question that's even more daunting to me is, how could this happen in the first place? And I teach medical ethics, and so I'm particularly troubled and mystified by the involvement of physicians in the camps. And I wondered if you had any experience with the healthcare profession or have any insight as to how people who are dedicated to helping people could be involved in such horrific acts.
Well, as I was telling you, in Terezin, we had many hospitals, and it were the prisoners who were the doctors, and they did a fantastic job with whatever they had, because we had typhoid, scarlet fever, meningitis, and so on. So they were doing a great job. And you couldn't ask for anything more than being treated by people. And don't forget, medications, it wasn't like you were here in Vermont and you go to Berlin to the hospital. If you were in Terezin, they just tried to help you to feel better and get better. So is that answering your question, or is it about doctors who performed experiments. Is that what you're talking about? Well, these were, Mengele wasn't the only one who was doing the experiments. There were other doctors in different camps who were doing many, many experiments on prisoners. And, you know, we had nothing to say. It was the people who were running the camps, they were quite okay with that. And it was a tragedy because many of the people they performed these horrible experiments on, they died. Yes?
Oops. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for being here, and I want to praise God for having you alive. And then I want to tell you that I have a friend whose mother was in Bergen-Belsen, and she would love to know if there is a roster or a list of people who were there.
There is. In Bergen-Belsen, they have a big museum, and you can write to them, and they'll be only too happy to
tell you.
They will be able to find out all about the lady.
Really?
Yes.
Where can we get this address?
I'm sure you can find it on the computer.
Internet.
Yes, it's called the Bergen-Belsen Museum.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Can I invite anyone else with a question? Thank you.
Once again, thank you. I just wanted to add that. I have lots of questions, but one in the pamphlet that came, it talked about you visited the camps recently, or you went back. Could you talk more about that, your time back at the camps and how that experience was?
Well, the first time I went back to Poland was in 1999. I was participating in the March of the Living. We take young people, grade 11, usually around 200 or so, and then we have educators with us, and then you have people like me who go on those trips. It's not just from Canada, the March of the Living. They come from the United States, from Australia, from South Africa, from Panama, and we all meet then in Auschwitz. So we fly from Montreal to Warsaw, and from Warsaw we go to Krakow. We visit Schindler's factory, which is not there anymore, just an office building. And we go to Plaszow. Plaszow is a place where he got his workers from. You find it when you drive out of Krakow. There's a huge monument, but it's not for the Jews. This monument is for the Poles. For the Jews, you have to go a little in over hilly terrain, and there's just a little plaque there. That's all. But that's where Schindler got his workers. And then the next day, we would go to Auschwitz. Auschwitz today, I'm sad to tell you, the main campus, or whatever you want to call it, became a tourist attraction. I'm glad that a lot of people want to visit Auschwitz, but Poland is cashing in on that. When you arrive there, that was not in 1999, but now, and the last time I was there in 2004, they added a restaurant and a huge gift shop. Disgusting. So then you go and you visit all the exhibits, and there is still a gas chamber, is still intact. It's on the side, it's underneath, and the roof is just grass. And then we assemble all the marchers from all the countries, and we start marching toward Birkenau. So when I was the first time back in 99, all the students only wanted to know, is it how it was? Do you remember it? I said, no, it wasn't like that. because they added the entrance. When we arrived by train, and then we went on a truck. Later on, they know how to do things, right? They built a train which went directly into the gas chamber. So when they selected people on the train, they didn't have far to march. So as we were walking, and I was being asked, was it like that? Was it? And I said, no, it wasn't like that. And then we would enter, and there is a row of barracks left from the A camp. And I went in, and I collapsed. It was like I would hear all these voices around me. It was so noisy. And I fell down. They picked me up, and I was okay again. And we went into one of the barracks, and there I addressed the students. I told them, this is how we slept. And, as I said, the Germans have so many different names, and they called each part, was called a Koje. Koje number 1, Koje number 2, and so on. So I explained to them our life in that place. It was very difficult for me. But I went back again in 2001, and the last time I went in 2004. I was supposed to go in 2003, but something happened. I was asked to come to Saskatoon, which is very far away, in Saskatchewan. I don't know whether you know the map of Canada, but it's way up there. And so they asked me to come and speak to students in Saskatoon. And I said, yes, I will come. But let me think about it, because I'm supposed to go on the march again in the spring, and it just coincided with that. But then something happened. An Indian chief by the name of Ahaniku was being interviewed by a journalist. And he said that what Hitler did was a good thing, that he burned all those Jews. He had some other things, he said, which were not so pretty. And I said, that's where I have to go. I have to go to Saskatoon, where Mr. Ahaniku lives. I asked the Jewish community that they should make an appointment for me, that I could speak to Mr. Ahaniku. But they didn't. But I went anyway, because I thought it was important to speak to the young people of Saskatoon and tell them what can happen when they're bystanders. And so I went. I spoke to 1,200 young people, 600 in the morning and 600 in the afternoon. But I must tell you, not one child from the native schools came to listen to me. Mr. Ahaniku had 2 court cases. They brought him to court once. It wasn't decided. He got the honor, he was bestowed the honor of Canada. They took that away from him. And now he was before the court again. And the court decided that what he said was he didn't incite racism. And so they let him go again, which I'm very annoyed about. So I told it when I went back. And I'm asked to go again, but unfortunately, when you get a little older, it's a very hard trip, emotionally, physically, so it's too bad that I cannot go with the young people again. But I did what I could.
I think we'd be prepared to take another question or two, and then maybe 2 more.
You talked about how we should write letters to our senators and do
I
things.
can't understand what you're saying.
To make a difference now with the problems in the world, we should write letters and things. As young people, what's the single most important thing we can do or take away from what you're telling us to make a difference today?
You're asking me whether it would make a difference if people would write.
Well, what might be a single piece of advice that you could give young people to make a difference in the world today?
Getting involved. Don't take things lying down. When you see something which you think is wrong, speak up. Write to the authorities. One voice can make a big difference. We can change a lot. You would be surprised what one person can do. But if you have more, of course it's better. But it's possible to do things, even one.
Thank you for being here. How are you able to remain hopeful during that situation?
How I was able to what?
Remain hopeful?
To remain hopeful during such terrible times.
Well, this is, you have no way out. There's no way you can run. There's no way that anybody can help you. It's really up to you. You have to overcome these things. You have to say, I'm not going to give in. They're not getting me down. We have friends. You stick together, and you hope that you'll be able to overcome all these hardships. It's cold, you're hungry, it's dirty, but you're going to make it till tomorrow, and perhaps till after tomorrow. And you hope perhaps it's going to end, and you're going to show them that you are stronger than they are, and that they cannot get you down. Never give up.
How are you able to cope once you returned home?
I'm sorry.
The question was, how were you able to cope once you returned home? Do you mean to Czechoslovakia?
To recuperate from the experience.
This is a big question. How could we, who saw all these things happen, start a new life? But you know what? We wanted to start a new life. We didn't want to dwell on that. I remember in Prague when the war ended, and I was already there, we had this huge celebration. We would be dancing in the streets. We would be singing, and we celebrated the freedom. I would go dancing every Saturday night. I would go to the theater, to the opera. I never spoke about the things which happened to me, not right then. I had a boyfriend, and I met him again in 1996. And I asked him, tell me, what did we talk about? And he said, about the future. You had to leave this there. And now, after so many years, I'm talking about it because I know it is needed to be talked about. It's needed to be shared, especially with young people. Because you see, it can happen again. And it is happening. There's so many people who have suffered terribly, and nobody gives a damn. And this is what hurts me most.
I think we'll let's take these two questioners and then call it an evening.
I think you come here and talk to me. It's much easier.
Sure.
Than in the mic. It's very hard to listen. Yes. Good evening.
When I walked
No, I can hear her.
When I walked downstairs, I had one question in mind, but there's much more important question from it. I have dreams of the Holocaust that I have no way that I should know. I've never been taught this information. I'm wondering if your beliefs
No, I don't believe in afterlife.
Question whether Miss Ivry's belief system comprises a belief in the afterlife.
Thank you for being here tonight. It's been a very honorable thing to listen to you, your speech. My question is, did the people in those surrounding countries before the Holocaust started, did they have a right to bear arms? And if they did, were their arms taken away from them before the Holocaust started?
But all these little countries, you know, it's conscription. Everybody has to go into the army. Like in Czechoslovakia, everybody had to go for 2 years in the army. But only men, not girls. And I remember, you know, there were certain days they had to come, they had to go to the city. From my little village, they had to go to the city, and they had a big, from artificial flowers, they had a big bouquet there, you know, and they were so happy to, they weren't so happy, but they had to go, and they hoped not to be taken. They had flat feet, then they didn't have to go, right? And then they came home, I tell you, they were very drunk. And so all these countries, they had armies because you had to go to the army.
What about private civilian gun ownership? Was that allowed?
Yes.
It was?
Yes.
So were the...
But not like here, that everybody has 10 guns.
Thank you.
So when the Jewish people had everything taken away from them, probably their arms were part of that.
Well, I don't think Jewish people had any arms.
Oh, okay.
They don't shoot.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
In closing, I think I want to thank you for your rapt attention. I want to thank Don Vickers and the rest of the Ellsworth Trust for sponsoring this evening's event. And most of all, I want to give our thanks from Johnson State College and the state of Vermont to Mrs. Ivry for coming.